So far, as it relates to our minerals, we've covered quite a bit in terms of talking about calcium, for example, and we've also mentioned some of the other important minerals such as phosphorus. Now I want to talk a little bit about iron, and iron is an important component of hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is the element associated with a red blood cell that allows us to carry oxygen. Iron is also a really important component of immune function, so it will be important in developing and maintaining our white blood cells, which will be really important for our immune health. And when we think about iron on average, men have about 1,000 milligrams stored, while women only have about 300 milligrams stored. And so when we think about the discrepancy here as it relates to gender, this is much more of an important component to be considered for our females. And additionally, when we think about iron, again, I've listed some good sources here. Red lean meat is kind of our best option, but also lots of meat and animal products contain iron. Cereal is fortified with iron as well. Dark leafy greens, broccoli, spinach, those are also pretty good plant options for us. And unfortunately, we think about iron and iron supplements, it has one of the lowest supplemental bioavailabilities. Okay, so if you take a multivitamin and you look on the back of your multivitamin, it'll tell you what percentage of your daily value it's giving you. And a lot of times it'll give you like 300% of your daily value. And the reason for that is because we can only absorb about 10% of what we intake. So if it gives you a value of 300, you're probably going to absorb about 30%, okay, of your daily need from that particular supplement. There's actually a higher absorbability or a higher bioavailability when we have a deficiency. So if you are iron deficient and you begin taking an iron supplement or a multivitamin, we can get up to, 20-30% for that particular item. However, as we've already mentioned in this class so far, the real deal is your best option for getting vitamins and minerals. So eating those healthy foods is the best option. And we appear to have about a 35 to 55% bioavailability when iron comes from the actual food source. So when we are low in iron, this can lead to a condition called anemia. And anemia is when I have sort of like low red blood cells, as you can kind of see over here on this picture. They're just not as dense, right, in comparison to this normal configuration. We'll see this commonly in vegetarians, and again, the reason for that is iron is our best option is coming from animal sources. Also common in female athletes, as we mentioned, women just generally store less iron in comparison to men. Additionally, if you compare that to an average female athlete's diet, it is often not as rich in red meats in comparison to their male counterparts. However, universal supplementation of iron is not warranted for all athletes. This would be a factor that I would recommend, particularly if you're a female, getting checked every year at your physical exam or asking for them to get this checked. I get mine checked every year just to make sure I'm okay in that area. It's an easy blood draw to do, and they can easily add it in if you get a physical done. Sodium is one of the nutrients that has a bioavailability of nearly 100%. So we're very good at absorbing and utilizing sodium. Okay. And sodium is going to play a lot of important roles for us. It's going to aid in nerve transmission and water balance within the body. And also, if we have a deficiency of this, like if it's super hot, we're losing a lot of fluids because we're sweating, or we're drinking plain water in high quantities in like a hot, humid environment, this can lead to muscle cramping and dehydration. Now, again, I want to point out that this is different when we look at an average adult in comparison to an athlete. Okay, for average adults, the toxicity associated with high sodium diets can very often lead to health conditions such as hypertension or high blood pressure. However, for our athletes who are sweating a lot and losing a lot of fluids in our sweat, it's important that we're consuming enough sodium as to avoid muscle cramping and dehydration, right? So again, really got to think about who we're talking to when we talk about sodium. The other thing to keep in mind is a lot of our processed foods. So any processed foods are gonna most likely have sodium in them. So when we think about general population, this is something that they really need to watch out for. If they're sedentary and they're consuming a lot of processed foods, it is highly likely that they're over consuming sodium, and that's going to put them at a disadvantage from a cardiovascular health perspective. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. So potassium is a nutrient that is also going to be important in our nerve impulse transmission and also important in water balance. And we know that high levels would also be associated with hypertension, particularly when paired with high levels of sodium. There's not really any risks associated with deficiency, although this, ooh, there's a bug on me. Although this could lead to muscle cramping in athletes, again, particularly if we're like hot, humid environments where we're sweating quite a bit and losing a lot of fluid. So some examples of foods that are high in potassium. My dad always told me, like, if you get muscle cramps, to eat bananas, and the reason is they're high in potassium. So there's certainly some truth there. Avocados, again, dark leafy greens making their appearance with spinach, fish, citrus items, and like a green bean would also be good options. So now we want to move forward and take a look at the nutrient of water. And again, I think that when we think about water, it is easy for us to underestimate the power of good hydration. So when we think about the chemical composition of water, it's made of hydrogen and oxygen, H2O, you already know that. And essentially about 60% of the human body is made of water. And again, that number is actually a little bit higher if you are an athlete in comparison to non-athletes. What are the functions of the water within our body? Number one, transporting nutrients and waste. Number two, temperature regulation. So water, and in particular our blood, will serve as an excellent medium for us to carry heat. So we can carry heat to the skin surface to get rid of it, or we can shunt that heat towards our core to keep our core nice and warm as well. And number three is chemical processes. So this will serve as a fluid or a medium to which we can have different chemical processes occurring. So where do we have water? Okay, so we've got our total body water as about, like I said, 60% of our body weight, and this can be subdivided into intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. Intracellular means within the cell or inside the cell, and that represents about 40% of our total body weight. And then a smaller percentage, about 20%, is extracellular or outside of the cell, and this can be subdivided into two categories. Number one is interstitial fluid. And interstitial fluid is just like fluid that's like between the cells, I guess is the best way to describe that. So it's just kind of like this open, watery area. And then the other location is our plasma volume. And the plasma volume is the watery component associated with your blood. So it's like the water inside your blood, basically. So when we think about water balance at rest, okay, so under normal conditions, water intake matches our water output, right? So we need to match these two things. We need to drink enough to counteract that which we lose on a daily basis, okay? So our input, how do we get in fluids? Number one, we drink things, okay? And again, we have a variety of types of drinks that we consume, and some of them are going to be very hydrating for us, and some of them actually cause us dehydration. So things like sugary beverages, caffeinated products, and alcohol are all going to be fluids that we drink. However, they're not going to be great at giving us good hydration. We'll talk about why here coming up. We'll get 30% of our fluids from the foods we can consume. So again, a wide range of fluid concentration within different foods. So example, lots of fruit has a lot of water in it. Okay, so like grapes, watermelon, pears. I got some pears in the kitchen. Those are all kind of like juicy and those have a high water content. And then lastly, we have 10% of our fluid coming to us as a byproduct of aerobic metabolism. So if you remember that electron transport chain, which was the last component of the oxidative system, you might remember that water was kind of like a waste product or byproduct of that particular pathway. So the more aerobic work we do, the more water we produce as a metabolic byproduct. Okay, where's our output? Okay, so how do we lose fluid? Number one, evaporation from the skin surface. Okay, so we're constantly putting water on top of our skin surface, and that water needs to be accepted into the ambient air or the air around us and become more humid around us, basically. Okay, so about 5% of the fluid that we lose will come through evaporation from the skin surface. Okay. Number two is the respiratory tract. So when you breathe out, if you were to breathe against a window, you would notice that you would get like some condensation on the window, and that's because you're breathing out water each time you breathe. Okay, so that's 30%. Number three will be from the kidneys, and this comes in the form of urine. So our urine represents about 60% of our fluid loss. And lastly, the large intestines will produce our feces or our poop, and that will account for about 5% of our fluid loss. So on average, for a resting individual, we will exchange approximately 2 to 3 liters of fluid per day. So what about water balance during exercise? So water loss accelerates significantly due to an increased sweat rate. Also, that respiratory rate will increase as well. So we're going to lose additional fluids that way. Our sweat rate is determined by the environmental temperature. So the hotter it is, the more you sweat. Humidity. So again, the more humid it is, the more you sweat. And the reason for that is it becomes more challenging for us to have those water molecules be accepted into the ambient air. And as that occurs, that causes the heat to place more strain on us, essentially. So humidity is a major component. Wind, body size, and metabolic rate are all important components to determine our sweat rate. Also, we can think about dry conditions. So dry conditions, so no humidity and how that might affect our sweat rate, and also altitude as well. So lots of environmental challenges will impact our sweat rate. So to conserve water during exercise, we can decrease blood flow to the kidneys, which means we're not going to pee as much. And when we are done exercising, our pee will be more concentrated, essentially. Athletes lose 1 to 6% of water during an intense prolonged exercise. So again, if I'm 100 pounds, that's 5 pounds that I'm going to lose. So if I'm, 200 pounds, that's 10 pounds that you could lose in one single workout. In extreme conditions, such as hot, humid environments, we can lose 2 to 3 liters per hour of fluid. And again, on the previous slide, we said that 2 to 3 liters per day is normal while resting. So again, we're looking at huge, substantial differences in fluid loss based on the conditions, based on what we do. And I think the thing that's tricky about this, for example, so yesterday, I had 2 labs. It was sunny out. I was outside most of the day. I was outside for 2.5 hours for those labs. And then I went to a cross country meet, and again, it was sunny. It wasn't like crazy hot, but pretty warm. It was sunny, and I got there like 3:15, and the meet went till about 7:15. So I was there about 4 hours, mostly in the sun. And I'm still not caught up. Like I woke up in the middle of the night with muscle cramp. Like I had a headache by the end of the night, because even though I wasn't really like sweating a ton, you're still losing a lot of fluid when you're in those environmental conditions. So I think sometimes we forget that because we don't visibly see, or we don't really physically feel that sweat, that we don't realize how much we are losing. Because again, you can place sweat on your skin surface. It's called insensible sweat, and you don't even know it's there. It's just such small, minute like elements that you don't even know it's there. And then we're dissipating that from our skin surface all the time. So again, that contributes to a substantial amount of fluid loss throughout any given day. Still catching up. So dehydration is of major concern to us when we think about exercise performance. And we know that exercise performance is decreased when as little as 2% of body weight is lost. Okay, so again, if I'm 150 pounds, that's like 3 pounds of body weight lost. Again, I would have no problems. This would be easy to lose 3 pounds in one workout. Okay. Losses in excess of 5% of body weight can decrease work capacity by 30% in endurance sports. Okay. So, again, a substantial decrease in performance. So, really thinking about what we can do to avoid dehydration is very, very important. For sprint athletes, time to exhaustion decreases by 45% with a loss of 2.5% of body weight. So again, it doesn't take much dehydration for us to see negative consequences in literally any type of exercise or sport setting. So it is really important that we figure out and think about how we can incorporate good hydration into our days in order to avoid this if at all possible. So even in thermoneutral environments, so again, think like a comfortable 70 degrees, lower humidity. VO2 max decreases by 5% when fluid loss is 3% of body mass or more. And again, let's talk about how many of you and how many college athletes are starting out the day dehydrated, right? You are starting out the day with an energy drink, which makes it worse. And then we're not really consuming a whole lot of water throughout our given day. Maybe we're consuming pop or coffee or energy drinks or, something along those lines that really make matters worse. So even in thermoneutral environments, so if I play volleyball, basketball, something like that where I'm inside, I'm still eligible to have potential damages associated with dehydration. Okay. Endurance performance will be more severely impaired by dehydration in comparison to many types of exercise. And we know that exercise in the heat will be impaired to a greater extent in comparison to exercise in a thermoneutral environment. And again, the heat is absolutely a challenge, but more of a challenge to us is humidity. So humidity is a huge challenge for us. And again, this is kind of how it works. So when we think about dissipating heat from our skin surface, in order for us to actually lose that heat, that water molecule or that sweat molecule has to move from a liquid form into a gaseous form and be accepted into the air around it. And if that air that we're in is already pretty concentrated and fluid, like if it's humid, the air feels really heavy. And the reason it feels heavy is because there's already a lot of water in there. That decreases the likelihood that your water or your sweat molecule from your skin surface will be able to make that conversion from fluid into gas. Okay. And so in a humid environment, instead of us being able to dissipate that heat, we end up sloughing off that sweat molecule. So when sweat drips off of you as opposed to being accepted into the ambient air, it doesn't do anything for us from a temperature regulation perspective. It only causes more dehydration. Okay. So again, that is the major physiological challenge associated with humid environments. So what are the consequences of dehydration? Okay, so again, when we have this negative water balance, so I'm not able to intake more or an equivalent amount to what I'm outputting, this can cause overheating. It can cause an increase in cardiovascular stress, causing us to decrease our cardiovascular output. It can lead to muscle cramping, a decrease in metabolic efficiency, so we're not able to access and break down our fuels as efficiently, reduced blood volume. And the issue with that is the blood becomes more viscous or thicker, and that places more strain on the heart if the blood is thicker because it's harder to pump through the vessels. A decrease in skin blood flow, a decreased sweat rate, decreased heat dissipation, increased core temperature, an increased rate of muscle glycogen use. Okay, so when we're dehydrated, we're more likely to use carbs as opposed to fats. And again, that's bad news for us because we have a limited amount of carbs stored. However, we don't have a limited amount of fat stored, which is why we would prefer to use fats as our fuel choice. So what are the recommendations as it's associated with hydration prior to exercise? So ACSM says we need to drink 4 hours before exercise, 400 to 600 mils of fluid. This ends up shaking out to be about 13 to 20 ounces of fluid. So this is 20 ounces of fluid. So you need one of these guys 4 hours before you start. Okay. Then 2 hours before, we need a little bit less, maybe about 8 ounces or so. So it's 3 to 5 mils per kilogram per body weight. And then 10 to 20 minutes before, we need like 7 to 10 ounces. So about a cup or so, 10 to 20 minutes before we begin our warm up for that particular exercise. Again, when we think about water and electrolyte loss during exercise. This can vary greatly depending on a lot of factors. And again, we're not just concerned with the fluid loss, we're also concerned with the electrolyte loss as well. So basically, your sweat is made up of not only water, but it also contains some electrolytes in there as well. Okay. And again, those electrolytes are things that hopefully you're replacing with some mix of an electrolyte drink mix essentially, and that's kind of why those were developed to kind of account for the electrolytes that we're losing. So how much do we lose depends on several different factors. Number one is environmental conditions. Again, we said hot, humid environments are going to be the most tolling. Mode of exercise will make a difference. So again, is this a like for example, like cycling. If I'm cycling and it's 85 degrees and hot and humid, that's not as tolling as running in that particular condition, or doing something more stationary in those conditions, because when you're biking, you've got like the wind resistance associated with you moving through, moving a little bit faster. So mode of exercise will make a difference. Training status will matter. Body composition or body size, and then also gender will also make a difference in terms of water and electrolyte loss. What about post-exercise hydration? So we certainly want to replace the fluids that we lost as it relates to water, but we should also think about electrolytes. Carbohydrates can also be included in this, and this can begin as quickly as possible post-exercise. So again, something like a Gatorade that contains sugar, electrolytes, and fluid would be an excellent choice. And again, Gatorade's just one brand. There's so many great options in terms of electrolyte carbohydrate drink mixes out there. 16 to 24 ounces of water replacement beverages should be consumed for every pound that's lost during the exercise. Again, I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are weighing themselves before and after workouts, with the exception of wrestling. And then, tracking that and using that information and know, like, okay, well, I need 3 Gatorades because I lost, this much weight or anything like that. But again, that's what ACSM says we should do. I don't think a lot of people are really doing that. But again, I think part of that is like trial and error, right? Like you kind of get a feel for how much you need, and kind of learn how to appropriately replace that is kind of the idea. So, next thing I want to talk about is an athlete's diet. Okay, so again, when we think about how do we take all of this information, how do we take the information about carbs, fats, proteins, these vitamins that we've highlighted, and the particular minerals that we've focused in on, how do we take all this information and put it together, right? So, as athletes, we spend hours and hours focusing on developing our physical performance. However, we ignore the little things like nutrition and sleep and how important those are for our success as it relates to sport performance, also recovery from exercise, but probably most easily for us to kind of forget about is injury prevention, right? Good nutrition and good sleep makes a world of difference when we think about injury prevention, okay? And while a good diet can certainly not replace the hard work that you've done in your training, it can enhance or hinder your performance greatly. Okay, so again, the diet is not the main star, right? This is not the main element of performance. However, it can make a huge freaking difference. Like you're already doing the hard work. Do the easy things, right? Do the easy things, the little things, eating well, sleeping well, in order to put yourself in position to reach your true potential. Okay. So when we think about this and what does this mean and how do I do better and how do I progress myself in a way that will work in my lifestyle based on, the challenges that I have, who do you talk to as an athlete? Who should you talk to about proper nutrition if you're not sure, right? So that's a question that I think is maybe the first step for us in terms of understanding how to do this and whose job is it for us to kind of like, keep these things in mind, right? Whose job is it to educate athletes on good nutrition, right? So some of you would say it's the coach's job. Maybe you might say athletic trainer. Maybe you might say a dietitian. And again, I would say, I would guess none of you in this class have ever met with a dietitian. And if you have, it'd be maybe 1 out of 38 of you. So again, while that is absolutely the right person, that person just isn't super accessible to us. And you don't probably know one, and you don't know how to contact them or what that looks like. And that's okay. Like that is absolutely okay. So again, when we think about our role as physical therapists, as athletic trainers, as strength and conditioning specialists, okay, I do think it's important that we educate ourselves on how to do these things, how to implement this, how to talk about it in an appropriate way, and how to provide our athletes with resources that they can use to set themselves up for success. Because I do think I probably have a lot of athletes that I've worked with over the years, whether it be high school or college athletes, that would do the right things if they knew the right things to do, right? And they would eliminate some of the bad things if they knew those things were bad. So while I think the basics are pretty easy for people to understand, I do think there is a lot to be, learned as it relates to education associated with this. And so I think that that's something that's really important to think about when you think about your role with athletes, right? How are you going to guide them in an appropriate way so that we are setting them up for success as they move through whatever program they might be a part of? So, first thing I want to talk about is the pre-competition meal. What do we eat? What is good to eat and why? Okay. So our pre-competition meal, again, I would imagine most of you as college athletes have an idea of what works for you and you should stick with that. Okay. So when we think about a pre-competition meal, we should contain 200 to 500 calories of carbs that's easily digested. It could be a liquid option as well. I use a product called Tailwind that has 100 calories per scoop, and I'll use 2 scoops. It's mostly carbs. It has a little bit of caffeine, or some of the flavors have some caffeine in it as well, which is a performance enhancer for endurance exercise. So I might have something like that. Again, when we think about 200 to 500 calories of carbs that's easily digested. You could think about bagel, oatmeal, toast, something along those lines. Cereal would be a great option. Something that's easy to digest. Maybe you include liquids in this meal as well. Now, when we think about recovery, okay, we have what's called a metabolic window. And the metabolic window is 30 to 45 minutes after the exercise. And if we ingest nutrients during our metabolic window, this will put the muscle in an anabolic state or allow the muscle to build back. Okay. And if carbohydrate supplementation is not given until 2 hours after the exercise, this greatly reduces the rate of muscle glycogen uptake and glycogen resynthesis. Okay, so essentially, what I'm saying is following hard workouts, following a hard competition, you have this window that's 30 to 45 minutes after the exercise is over in order for you to get in a good solid meal. And again, it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be as little as like 200 calories. It could be like a Cliff Bar, for example. But if we ingest nutrients during that window, that's going to help us immensely in the recovery process. Okay. So this is going to help us replenish liver and muscle glycogen. It can also we'll see a reduction of sugar stores by 75% in a 3-hour moderate cycling bout. And again, these can reduce at levels of about 40% during a 45-minute resistance exercising training session. Okay, so when we think about glycogen depletion, this applies to most of us. Okay, so again, if you're doing high intensity exercise, 45 minutes or longer, we are having substantial amounts of glycogen used. Okay, so again, I would imagine most of our practices are lasting at least 45 minutes. So this is a big deal. Okay. And when we think about this recovery window, it's probably not essential that we hit this every single time we exercise. However, it is very important that we hit this on our long or intense workouts for sure. So this is me being a nerd, but I like taking a look at what this kind of shows us. So this shows us, okay, 0 represents I just finished the exercise. Here's 15 minutes post exercise, 30 minutes post, and so on and so forth. And again, check out this anabolic activity. The potential for us is greatest within that 15 to 45 minute window. Okay, so this metabolic window is a major key for enhancing recovery. If I can eat something or drink something here, that's going to help me to feel so much better the next day. It's going to help my muscles to recover at a faster rate, which would allow me then to be able to do a harder workout sooner and therefore get more quality out of my training and be able to improve at a faster rate than my opponents. Again, if a individual is not fed during the exercise, I'm sorry, following the exercise, the rate of muscle glycogen resynthesis is around 2 millimoles per kilogram. Okay, that means nothing so far, but it will when I tell you the next number. So if I don't eat, it's 2 millimoles per kilogram. Okay, if the individual is given appropriate amounts of carbs following exercise, this will increase my rate of resynthesis to 20 to 45 millimoles per kilogram. Okay, so I have tenfold improved my recovery ability by just eating some quality carbs when the exercise is over. It is that simple. So how much carbs should we intake? Okay. So current recommendations for carb intake to optimize this glycogen recovery is only 50 to 75 grams of carbs with moderate to high GI. Okay. Again, that's only 200 to 300 calories. That's not a whole lot. Okay. And we can continue to consume 50 to 75 grams of carbs every 2 hours post exercise. Okay. So, when we think about recovery as it relates to intense interval training, we need about 4.8 grams per kilogram per day. That shakes out to be about 1,300 carbohydrate calories for a 150-pound person. When we think about this as it relates to resistance training, it's 6 to 8 grams per kilogram. Again, these are carbohydrate recommendations. And that shakes out to be almost 2,000 calories for a 150-pound person. Okay. Again, we want to focus on quality options here. So quality sources of carbohydrates. So again, think oatmeal, think brown rice, think, whole wheat noodles, things like that, whole wheat bread. All of those would be great options for us in terms of quality carb sources. Also, fruits and vegetables have carbs as well. So thinking about sprinkling those in with those other carb choices would be an excellent idea. Now, there's this other concept that I want to briefly touch on known as protein co-ingestion. And essentially, we've talked about that we need carbs as part of our recovery process, but if we consume proteins alongside of this might even be better. Okay, so the combination of carbs and proteins will enhance the release of insulin, and this actually helps us to promote glycogen resynthesis. Okay, so if I consume proteins and carbs together, this is a good option for us. Okay, it is not necessarily better than just the consumption of carbs if the quality of carb consumption is adequate. So again, if I can hit the carb guidelines with quality options, that's pretty good. Or I can do the protein and carb option, and that's pretty good too. Personally, I would try to always choose the carb and the protein option together, because proteins are going to serve a lot of other unique functions as well. Okay, so again, not only are we interested in resynthesizing glycogen, but we're also interested in muscle repair and recovery as well. So both are very important for us. So why not do two birds with one stone here? Okay. This shows you an example from a study where we looked at plasma glucose concentrations when I had a carb meal post-exercise in comparison to a carb and protein meal post-exercise, and notice that the change is very comparable. So again, we didn't see much of a difference between the carb meal and the carb plus protein meal. So again, my recommendation kind of based off this is you might as well do both, right? If it's gonna be about the same from a glycogen perspective, then you might as well get your muscles recovering as well by consuming that protein alongside. So, as I mentioned, protein is going to have its own important jobs associated with that recovery process. So, resistance training, for example, will lead to muscle protein breakdown in those targeted muscles. And we know that anabolic activity occurs during the following 24 to 48 hours. Okay, so 24 to 48 hours post exercise, that's when we've got this recovery process kind of rolling through. Okay, so consumption of protein in recovery can help us with number one, muscle repair, but number two, adaptation to training. Okay, so we'll see a greater synthesis of amino acids. And all we need to do in order to kind of focus on protein recovery, or proteins during recovery, is consume about 20 grams of protein. Okay, that's enough to kind of maximize that synthetic rate within the muscle. And again, 20 grams is not a lot. It is very small amount. That's only like 80 calories worth of protein. So it would be easy for us to kind of add this in addition to those quality carbs, in order for us to kind of hit these guidelines. All right, my friends, that is it for today. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.